So, Spider-Man 4 brand new day. It's been a long time coming. The hype is, as they say, real. But here's the thing, I'm just not excited for MCU Spider-Man anymore. Now, hold on before you click off this video thinking this is just another YouTuber bashing on Holland's Spider-Man. And while YouTube videos angrily bashing on this version of Spider-Man are practically a cottage industry on YouTube, this isn't going to be one of those. I wanted to lay out my reasons in a calm, respectful manner as to why I just don't care about MCU Spider-Man any longer. I can respect wanting to take a character in a new direction, especially when that character has been adapted to the big screen as much as Spider-Man has been in the last 23 years. So I don't begrudge the writers on the MCU Spider-Man Home trilogy for trying something new. Before Homecoming, people had seen two different versions of Peter Parker within 5 years of each other. They had to think up a new way of coming at Peter Parker and Spider-Man that wasn't like what Raimi and Webb did with their films. It was necessary to take a big swing, and I'll give the writers and John Watts all the credit in the world for trying. A solid A for effort all around for sure, but I just can't get behind this version of Peter Parker they created, or the approach that they took with Spider-Man and the related Spider-Man cast of characters. I'm not being dramatic when I say that MCU Spider-Man is easily my least favourite of the three live-action versions. I would even go as far as to say that it's the adaptation that gets the most wrong about the character. Yes, even more than Mark Webb's Amazing Spider-Man. And that's saying something. Like I said, I'm open to new takes on characters, but I think a different take has to really add something new to the mythos, you know? Aunt May being a younger, more vital woman was an interesting idea. It was a nice change of pace for sure, but what did the writers do with a younger Aunt May in this trilogy? Nothing. They did nothing with her. She's barely a character in these movies. I couldn't tell you one interesting thing about her. The most noteworthy characteristic that's ever brought up about May in these films is that she's Peter's hot aunt. And oh boy, do the writers just love to lean into this aspect. It's practically her entire character. There were opportunities to do more with Aunt May in this franchise. There really were. Case in point, remember when Aunt May found out at the end of No Way Home that Peter was Spider-Man? At the time, I remember thinking, that's interesting. We've never seen Aunt May in any of these Spider-Man films actually having to come to terms with Peter's secret life. I mean, there were hints for sure that Rosemary Harris's Aunt May knew that Peter was Spider-Man, but never anything as explicit as her actually seeing him in the costume. There was some solid story potential in the idea of her knowing. Some interesting drama to be mined out of Aunt May being in on the secret for once. But then Far From Home rolls around and we get to see the fallout from this big cliffhanger moment. And Aunt May's just fine with Peter being Spider-Man, just totally supportive of the whole thing. She actually thinks he should be out there being Spider-Man more. I remember being really confused by her being so chill about this whole thing, because wasn't her one big substantive scene in Homecoming all about how worried she was about Peter's unexplained absences, and also how concerned she was for his well-being? And it made total sense, obviously, for her to be so worried about Peter and spooked by his behaviour, even more so than a regular parent or guardian, because, you know, she would have lost her own husband not too long ago. What happened between these two films that made her do this 180 shift? How did she go from this?
I've been calling you all day. You don't answer your phone. You can't do that. I've called 5 police stations.
To this?
You know what? You should pack your suit, just in case.
Shouldn't she be even more worried for Peter's safety now, considering she knows he's actively endangering himself on a daily basis? It's like any of that potentially interesting interpersonal conflict that would come out of Aunt May knowing that Peter was Spider-Man was just thrown out so we could get scenes like this instead.
I thought that you could sense that with your Peter tingle.
Please do not start calling it my Peter tingle.
It's only in No Way Home that the writers actually tried to do something meaningful with Aunt May again and remember that she's meant to play a much bigger role in Peter's life. So they decide to upgrade her character status from Hot Aunt to the new Uncle Ben, and this works about as well as you'd expect. Don't get me wrong, Marissa Tomei is a good actress, and she gives a good performance in her final scene here, but are the writers legitimately expecting the audience to feel genuinely sad when she finally buys it here? Like I said, Aunt May is barely more than a walk-on part in these films. She's had more comedic scenes with Happy Hogan in these films than she's had meaningful ones with Peter. This is a hollow scene, man. It doesn't ring true at all. I don't feel anything for this Aunt May because the writers have never done anything with her. Why should I care that she's dying now when she's barely been a character in this entire franchise? If Sam Raimi pulled this same trick and killed off Rosemary Harris's Aunt May in Spider-Man 3, I would have legitimately felt sad because Aunt May was a fully developed character in those films. She actually served a purpose. I had a connection to her because I saw her mourn the loss of her husband. I saw her have money issues. I saw her get shot down by an asshole loan approver played by Joel McHale when she asked if she qualified for a free toaster. When you actually compared these two versions side by side, you can really see how the writers totally dropped the ball in terms of the potential of Aunt May in these films. Okay, so the writers messed up Aunt May and her relationship to Peter, but they got the other important foundational stuff about Spider-Man spot on, right? Right? Well, no, actually, the writers dropped the ball on a lot more than Aunt May in these films. You'd never guess it from watching the home trilogy, but Spider-Man typically is a character that is always just about scraping by financially. Him and Aunt May. This was another huge aspect of Peter's life that was just totally omitted in these films. Outside of one reference to Peter dumpster diving for some of his tech in Civil War, you never see this guy out of pocket for anything, or really worrying about money in general. In fact, this apartment here looks like a really nice place to live. It's quite cozy. Peter's always pretty well turned out too. Shit, he's even able to take what I would imagine is a pretty expensive European class trip, and there's not even so much as a word from him or Aunt May about not being able to afford it. Financial hardship and Peter Parker go hand in hand in the books. Pick up a random issue of ASM and you probably won't make it to the end without hearing Peter comment about how he doesn't have enough money to pick up May's prescriptions or buy the chemicals that he uses to make web fluid. This guy is always worried about cash. It's a fundamental part of his character. You know what also used to be a really big part of the early Spider-Man comics? How Peter was kind of really unpopular at school and used to be on the receiving end of a lot of bullying. And I'm sorry, but you can't tell me that Flash Thompson is bullying Peter in these films. At worst, I can say that Flash ribs Peter from time to time, but to say he's bullying him would be a stretch. I can understand Flash Thompson being a pretty formidable bully in the Lee Ditko Spider-Man comics, and also in the Raimi and Webb films. But here in these flicks, I don't know, Pete, I mean shit, even without the powers, I think you could probably take him. The Amazing Spider-Man films got a lot wrong, and even though Garfield's Spider-Man was always a little too cool for me, you still saw his Peter Parker being picked on and bullied by some of his classmates. MCU Peter Parker never feels socially awkward or nervous like he does in the comics. Don't get me wrong, I don't think this Peter is anything close to Andrew Garfield's cool guy version of Peter Parker. I mean, he definitely doesn't have that level of unmatched riz. No, it feels like MCU Peter is well liked by his classmates. It just feels like a pretty regular, normal kid. I've never gotten the impression from him that he was ever bullied or picked on or had issues with girls, or really had any issues at school at all. You know what's also a really big missed opportunity in this franchise? Any connection or mention of Uncle Ben. For as little as I ever hear Peter lament Uncle Ben or see Aunt May mourn him, I've got to assume that Peter and Aunt May hated this guy in this universe and they're glad he's dead. Look, I'm kidding obviously, and I understand why the writers shifted focus off Uncle Ben's death in this trilogy. We've seen Uncle Ben catch rounds in 2 films in the last 24 years. We don't need to cover the same ground again, I get it. But to de-emphasize Uncle Ben's character and his death to this degree, where he is never even mentioned and nobody seems to be in any way negatively impacted by his death, feels very out of place for a Spider-Man film. I mean, if you know basically nothing about Uncle Ben, you probably still can tell me 2 things about him. He gets clipped by a thug that Peter could have stopped but didn't, which spurs him on to be a hero, and he gave Peter the slogan of which he lives his life by. With great power comes great responsibility. These 2 things are synonymous with Uncle Ben, and the writers took both of them and gave them to Aunt May. We've seen Peter shed tears for Tony Stark, but never for the guy who helped raise him. I mean, was this guy even killed in a mugging? Did he just walk out on May and Peter, and that's why nobody seems to give a shit about him? Was he a deadbeat parent in this universe? This suitcase with Uncle Ben's initials on it is the only tangible proof that this guy even existed in this universe. For what it's worth, you could say that Aunt May has always been a single parent, and it would change nothing about MCU Peter's journey and development into becoming Spider-Man. And honestly, maybe that's what the writers should have done, because his absence in these films, and how little anyone seems to really miss him, actually raises alarms. Okay, you know what's coming. I can't talk about the absence of Uncle Ben and not also talk about Peter's true surrogate father. The man this whole f***ing universe apparently revolves around. Robert Downey Jr. Tony Stark. Yeah, look, Tony Stark being a replacement for Uncle Ben in this universe is probably the creative change that has done more damage to this character than any of the other things I've mentioned today. Definitely the change that's pissed the fandom off the most. Peter Parker, traditionally depicted as the scrappy, working-class hero of the Marvel Universe, has a wealthy mentor who now designs his suits and supplies him with gadgets that would easily cost hundreds of millions of dollars. You can change some aspects of a character when you're reinterpreting them to the screen for the third time. But when Spider-Man is jumping around in Endgame in Iron Man's hand-me-downs, that's a bridge too far. That was where Marvel Studios lost the point of origin with Spider-Man. I mean, I guess we should have seen the warning signs early on. When Peter Parker is dropping lines like this in his introduction, we probably should have known this whole Stark arc wasn't going anyplace good.
Guys, look, I'd love to keep this up, but I've only got one job here today, and I gotta impress Mr. Stark, so...
Was Peter actually pro-registration in Civil War, or was he just smacking other heroes around because that's what Tony Stark was ordering him to do? We never actually find out his stance on registration, and you'd think that would be a pretty important thing to a character like Spider-Man, who has a hard and fast rule about keeping his family safe by keeping his identity a secret. To be fair, the whole Iron Man Spider-Man mentorship thing didn't come off the rails right away. Homecoming had a lot of Tony Stark fanboying going on for sure, but it was still a good Spider-Man film in its own right. The rot only really started to set in Far From Home, and Far From Home was actually the perfect opportunity to sever that Tony Stark-Peter Parker connection and establish Spider-Man as his own hero. Tony Stark was dead, and it felt natural for Peter to move on and forge his own path. But nope, the decision was made to make Mysterio into a disgruntled Stark Tech employee whose whole gimmick was built around Stark technology, further tying Spider-Man to Tony Stark's legacy. Far From Home rolls around in 2021, and maybe with RDJ being out of the MCU for 2 years at this point, this was the chance to fully cut the cord and separate Spider-Man from Tony Stark once and for all. But no, Watts and Co just couldn't pull the band-aid off. We of course get some obligatory Stark Tech in No Way Home, and Happy Hogan gets ham-fisted into the screenplay for good measure. This is a Spider-Man film after all, you wouldn't want to leave out the secondary Iron Man adjacent characters. What's funny, you could actually come away from this trilogy thinking that Happy Hogan played a more important part in Peter's evolution into Spider-Man than Uncle Ben did. There hasn't been an MCU Spider-Man film that this guy hasn't appeared in. Also, a new worrying trend starts becoming apparent in No Way Home. Marvel obviously doesn't want this Spider-Man to ever stand on his own 2 feet, because another older mentor figure with a goatee is drafted in to pull Pete's fat out of the fire. Enter Doctor Strange. Why do we need to keep tying Spider-Man to other heroes? He's one of the most popular comic book characters. He can carry a film on his own. He's had 5 films before this trilogy. And that brings us to where we are now, the new post-Far From Home era, and what my problem is. You could say, well, all this stuff I've mentioned here today, that's in the past. It's a brand new day for the web slinger. And yeah, it is. But here's my problem. Aunt May, Uncle Ben, financial hardship, bullying, girl troubles, all of that stuff that's so foundational to the character of Spider-Man, that stuff was never present in the backstory of this Peter Parker. And because it's not here, it's hard to really think of this guy as Spider-Man. These elements are what make you root for Spider-Man, what makes Spider-Man so relatable. These are the elements that the writers removed in an attempt to make their version of Spider-Man different from the 2 that came before. I said at the start that you can make changes to a character, but changes like these, altering core relationships so that they are practically meaningless, omitting fundamental character elements that help people relate to the character, these are the things you're not supposed to mess with. It never ends well when you start changing a character to this degree. Take for example something as simple as Peter Parker learning the "with great power comes great responsibility" message in Far From Home. It's great that Peter is finally learning it, but just think about when he learns it for a second. Peter Parker learns the core lesson, the one that defines his character, at the end of his 3rd movie, the conclusion of a trilogy. So what's been motivating Peter as Spider-Man for the last 3 movies? Imagine watching a Batman movie and only finding out in the last 5 minutes that Bruce Wayne's parents are actually still alive. It would change everything you thought you knew about the character's motivation. It doesn't matter that the next film is a back-to-basics fresh start. The damage has already been done from a character perspective. 3 films worth of poor characterization isn't going to be magically washed away just because the writers decided to hit the reset button. I don't think Peter's suddenly getting a crash course in poverty, and a degree from the School of Hard Knocks is going to suddenly make him into the comic book accurate Spider-Man that we all know and love. That's not how character development works. And also, about this whole back to basics approach, how are the writers on these future Spider-Man films ever going to introduce the official MCU versions of Green Goblin, Doc Ock, or the Lizard, or Sandman? In the case of Green Goblin, wouldn't Peter know instantly it's Norman who's under the mask? Wouldn't Peter be instantly sus about a well-meaning scientist whose life's work it is to create a big set of metal octopus arms? Or when another scientist mentions that he wants to fuse human and lizard DNA? And to this you could say, well, Marvel Studios isn't interested in doing another version of Green Goblin or Doc Ock. They want to push other villains to the forefront in the future Spider-Man films. But here's the thing, Green Goblin isn't Big Wheel, and Doc Ock isn't the Kangaroo. These characters aren't ones you can just fully omit from a Spider-Man franchise. They're kind of important, and if Marvel actually does want to do something with these characters down the line, they probably have to drastically change them now, so that they would fit in a post-Far From Home movie. I really liked Far From Home, man, but it will cause some long-term damage to the Spider-Man franchise going forward. The Tobey Maguire version of Spider-Man will always be my favourite, because Raimi got what made the character work. To an extent, I felt Webb and co also understood the basic conceit of Spider-Man in the Amazing films. They made their own mess with those characters in those films, but I could see a genuine version of Peter Parker buried under all of the bullshit of those movies. Outside of one film, Homecoming, I've never felt like the characterization of Spider-Man was on the money in this franchise. I don't think any of the writers after Jonathan Goldstein and John Francis Daley understood the assignment and actually got what made this guy tick. Maybe this new creative team will. I'm hoping they honestly do. I want to be excited for Spider-Man on the big screen again. Feel free to scream at me in the comments below. Like, share, subscribe. Maybe hit the notification button if you're feeling generous. And as always, thanks for watching.